Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's once again time to trap our pets in tiny little capsules as we speculate on Pokemon. Now the other day I was thinking about Pokemon teams, and that's because I'm currently working on designing my own Pokemon fan region. I'm only a little bit into the process, there's still a lot to go, so don't expect that video anytime soon. However, I also had Doctor Who on in the background, and it kind of got me thinking, what would his Pokemon team be? And then that got me thinking, what would the teams be for other iconic characters? And so because of that, that's what this video is going to be about. Now for each of the characters, I've chosen teams that I think in some way represent either them or their supporting cast, and have something to do with their personality or something along those lines. In none of the cases have I chosen a sort of gym leader team or anything like that, so quite a few of them might be quite unbalanced. But when I was thinking about it, I didn't want to do anything that would be like competitively viable. I didn't want to take it too seriously. I just wanted to have a little bit of fun and have a little bit of a think of some of the Pokemon that might represent these people. Now with all that being said, let's jump right in with the character that inspired this entire video, and that of course is the Doctor from Doctor Who. Now for the Doctor's team, it was quite an interesting one. Of course I could have just chosen basically all of the Ultra Beasts, of course they're basically all aliens, and that would kind of fit him pretty well. But instead I kind of went for more that sort of fit his personality. I also didn't choose any that kind of represent any of the monsters in Doctor Who, because that would have been fairly boring. I would have basically just chosen Bronzong for a Dalek and Genesect for a Cyberman, but anyway, that's not the point. The Pokemon I did choose, I'm going to start with LGM. Now I think LGM is a really good choice because it sort of represents the general sort of concept of aliens, and that fits the Doctor really well. Not only that, but who is very significant to the Doctor? His trusty robot dog K9. And because of that I thought that he needed to be represented in this team, and so I went for Manectric. Manectric of course is an electric type dog Pokemon and also is quite often found with Officer Jenny. And I think this is a good connection because obviously the Doctor travels around in a police box. Also I chose the Pokemon Unknown. That's mainly because I think the Unknown script looks a little bit like the Gallifreyan language, and I just thought that'd be quite a fun inclusion. On top of that I also chose Roselia, mostly because of the 10th Doctor. Of course Roselia represents Rose Tyler. On top of that I think one of his signature Pokemon would be a Shiny Ditto. Mostly because the Shiny Ditto is blue, obviously, like the TARDIS. But also Ditto sort of transforms, and I think that this is a perfect representation for regeneration. His final Pokemon would depend a little bit. If he was in a game, I think that it would depend on the version that you got. In one version he would have Palkia, and in the other he would have Dialga. And that's because these two Pokemon from Diamond and Pearl represent space and time, and that's a perfect fit for the Doctor as he travels throughout space and throughout time of course. I quite like this team. It's not at all balanced, but I think it represents the Doctor pretty well. The next character that I'm going to talk about is Sherlock Holmes, and he was another fun one to do. I'm going to start off with the easy obvious one and give him Pikachu, mostly because of Detective Pikachu. Of course, his companion would also be wearing a Deerstalker. Not only that, but I also chose the Pokemon Krikachu. Quite often Sherlock is presented as some sort of savant, and particularly in the Sherlock TV series, he's always playing his violin, and because of that Krikachu is a really good fit. I also then chose Houndoom. Now Houndoom is a good fit for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a dog in general, and dogs play a big part in Sherlock Holmes, whether that be because of Sherlock's childhood dog, or whether it be because of Watson's dog. But the biggest inspiration here for me is of course Hound of the Baskervilles. Now I think that this was a good choice because it's a sort of demon dog, and that represents it really well here. The other three Pokemon I chose for Sherlock were a bit more difficult though. For these I kind of went for stuff that was a bit more sort of slightly connected. First off I went for Golurk. Quite often Sherlock is seen fighting against a golem or some sort of giant or something along those lines, and I think because of that Golurk fits quite nicely. Also on top of that, the last two Pokemon I chose were basically there to represent Sherlock's intelligence, and I chose Oranguru and Uxie. Now Uxie is the lake guardian that represents knowledge, and Oranguru is said to be so clever, so sort of feels like he's so above other Pokemon that he sometimes masquerades himself as a trainer. I thought that this was a perfect fit for Sherlock and for his arrogant attitude. I think that this is a pretty good team for Sherlock. It's quite a nice little balance, and some of them aren't quite as obvious connections, and I quite liked that. Now it's time for someone a little bit different, and for the next character I've chosen Spongebob Squarepants. Now I thought SpongeBob would be quite an interesting one, mostly because a lot of what could represent him is quite easy, to be honest with you. However, I did choose a few slightly left field picks. Now of course I'm going to once again start with some of the easy ones, and first off is Kingler. Now Kingler obviously represents Mr. Krabs. It's the most sort of iconic red crab Pokemon in the entirety of the franchise, and because of that I thought it'd be a good fit. On top of that, I also chose Pachirisu to represent Sandy Cheeks. It's a sort of hyperactive squirrel. It's an electric type, which fits really well as well because Sandy likes to invent things and that kind of stuff, so I thought that would also be a good fit. On top of that, I also chose Octillery. Now Octillery represents Squidward, and I think the face that Octillery pulls in its sort of official art as well looks very sort of depressed, a bit like Squidward. I thought that this was a good choice because of that. Now, as a slightly more interesting one as well, to represent Patrick, I went with Slowpoke. Now, I think you might have expected me to choose Starmie or Staryu, but I thought Slowpoke just sort of represents his essence a little bit better, and I just think fits him much better as a character. I also, of course, chose something to represent Gary, and the best choice for this, I think, is Sligoo. Now, it also adds a bit more type diversity to the team. Of course, as I said, it wasn't something that I really considered when I was making this, but I think it's a good fit anyway. Also, it looks quite a bit like Gary if the colours were slightly different. And finally, to round off the team, I wasn't sure who to choose, whether to be something to represent Plankton and go for sort of Carablast maybe, or whether it would be something to represent Pearl the Whale and go for something like Wailord or something like that. But none of them really fit very well, so in the end I went for Quillfish to represent Mrs. Puff. And that sort of rounds out SpongeBob's team, and I think that this is quite a nice one. Of course, it's heavily water-based, but how can it not be? The next character that I wanted to cover was a pretty big icon of film, and that's Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. Now, this was another fun one to do, and to be honest with you, another fairly easy one. Starting off with her dog Toto, which I think is represented very well by Herdia. Then moving on to the sort of trio that accompany her on her journey, and I went with Cacturn to represent the Scarecrow for obvious reasons. I mean, just have a look. And also on top of that, as the Tin Man, I went with Bisharp, which I know he looks a lot more evil than the Tin Man does, but there's no other sort of direct representative, I don't think. And to round it off, I went with Pyroar, the male version, obviously the one with the big mane. Now the last two picks weren't quite as straightforward, but I think I've chosen some pretty good Pokemon. What I've gone for is Miss Magius to represent the Wicked Witch of the West, which I think is quite a good fit. Looks like quite a dark kind of witch. And on top of that as well, I also chose Mankey. Now Mankey of course represents the winged monkeys, and while there isn't a winged monkey Pokemon, I think the attitude that's sort of represented by Mankey, the sort of hyperactivity, the sort of general kind of aggressiveness, I think works really well. My other shortlisted one was maybe Swobat because of the kind of the wings and the pig nose looks a little bit like that. However, I settled on Mankey in the end. I think this is a pretty good team for Dorothy, and it's actually quite a balanced one as well. Next up on my list is James Bond. And I had a few little clever choices for this, but to start off with, I went with Inteleon. Now Inteleon's quite an obvious choice. It's basically the James Bond of Pokemon. And along those lines, I also chose Remoraid and Kecleon. Now Remoraid represents the sort of guns that he might use, in particular the golden gun. If only he was golden himself, that'd be perfect. And Kecleon obviously represents disguise and sort of hiding in the shadows and that kind of stuff. Also, the sort of slightly more left field picks I chose were starting with Lopunny, which of course kind of represents Bond girls. It was kind of a sort of base choice, but I thought it makes a lot of sense for this one. On top of that, I also chose Squirtle, and the reason for this one was a slightly interesting one. Basically, I chose it because Squirtle's Pokédex number is 007. And of course, this could be substituted for any sort of regional dex as well, so in any region it might appear in, whichever is number 7 would be his Pokemon. And the last choice for James Bond is Farfetch'd, and that's almost entirely just because of his eyebrow. The eyebrow just reminds me of Sean Connery, and I think because of that it's a perfect fit. I think James Bond's team overall is pretty good, has a surprising lenience towards the water type, but hey, that's just my choice. The next iconic character I wanted to mention was Mary Poppins, and my decisions for her were made a lot easier by the introduction of the Galar region, which of course represents the UK. Because of that, a lot of the Pokemon introduced in this generation really represent sort of very British things, as does Mary Poppins. And to begin all of this, I chose Mr. Rhyme. Now, Mr. Rhyme of course is more representative of Charlie Chaplin, but I thought it also works really well for the sort of musical vibe of Mary Poppins anyway, and kind of is a stand-in a little bit for Dick Van Dyke. I thought it was a really good choice, but, you know, correct me if I'm wrong. On top of that, I also chose Drifloon. Now, I think Drifloon's quite an interesting one because it floats, first of all, just like Mary Poppins does, and also, although I haven't seen Mary Poppins Returns, I do hear balloons are quite important in that film. I don't know. Also, Mary Poppins Returns as well, on that kind of note, has something to do with lamplighters from what I know, and that's why I chose Lampant. Now, I think these are all pretty decent choices, but I've also got a couple more as well that I think represent her a little bit better. Now, the last three choices on her team start off with Chatot. Now, of course, Chatot is the music Pokemon. I thought this was a good fit because obviously Mary Poppins is a musical. I'm a little bit base value with some of my choices, I'll be honest with you. But then I also chose Ordino. Now, also Chansey could have fit really well here as well, but I just think Ordino looks a bit more like a caregiver, a bit more like a nanny, just as she is. I thought that would be a good choice because of that, and my final choice is Poltegeist. How could I not choose Poltegeist? Probably the most British of all the Pokemon out there. It's a haunted teapot. I mean, it fits really well. It probably also would have fit the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, but I think it works really nicely for Mary Poppins. All of that adds up to quite a nice little team there for Mary Poppins, and I'm quite pleased with my picks. Now, last up on my list, for this video at least, is one of the ones that I probably found the most fun to do, and that's Christopher Robin. Now, this is a really good team because of course Christopher Robin mostly hangs out with a bunch of animals, and so because of that, they're quite easily represented. However, I didn't always choose the most base option. Now, starting off with the Pokemon that represents Winnie-the-Pooh, and of course I went with Teddiursa. How could it be anything else? There are a few other bear choices, but I just think Teddiursa fits Winnie-the-Pooh the best. Next up, I chose Spoink, which of course represents Piglet, but also that curly little tail is quite a good stand-in for Tigger. Although, that doesn't mean I haven't chosen something for Tigger, and what I've gone for is Zeraora. Now, there aren't that many choices that represent a typical kind of tiger, particularly not one that's particularly hyperactive, but I think Zeraora does a good job of filling this kind of role in the team. Next up for Christopher Robin, I went with representatives for Owl, for Kanga and Roo, and for Eeyore. Now for the first two of those, I think you can see where I'm going. With Owl, I went with Noctowl because of course I did. Who else is it going to be? It's an intelligent owl. Noctowl is an intelligent owl. And Kanga and Roo, of course, are Kangaskhan. There's really no better fit for this. In fact, even the little baby inside Kangaskhan's pouch is blue when it comes out for the Mega. I think this works really perfectly. And last up for Eeyore, now I'm sure you probably think I'm going to go for Mudbray because Mudbray is the donkey Pokemon. However, Mudbray just doesn't scream Eeyore to me. One Pokemon that does, and it's not a donkey and it's not even a horse, it's Numel. Now, just look at the face of Numel in the art. It's just sort of, it just invokes Eeyore, and I think it's a pretty good stand-in. Now, of course, I could have chosen Mudbray, and I wouldn't blame you if you think I should have chosen Mudbray, but I just think Numel's a bit more of an interesting pick for Eeyore, and it's just something a little bit more interesting. I think Christopher Robin's team was really fun to put together, and there's a few other options in there as well. There's other characters I haven't even touched on. But I think that this is a pretty good choice and quite a fun little team. So there we go, there's everyone who I'm going to cover in this video. Now I had a lot of fun making this, so if you do want to see more, do let me know down in the comments. What other characters would you like me to cover? Should I cover video games, or are there any other particular film and TV characters that you'd like me to put a team together for? Also, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and please consider donating to our Ko-fi page. Every penny that you donate goes a long way to helping us make these videos and keep you entertained, hopefully. With all that being said though, thank you so much for watching, and of course, I'll see you next week.